Hello and welcome to another episode of On Screen. I'm your host Dylan Wright, and I'm here to take you on a journey through film and television. So this year marks the 10th anniversary of one of my favorite shows of all time, and I thought, what better time to cover it than right now, since it's the 10th anniversary. Today's topic is going to be Mad Men, the advertising executives of the 60s in New York City that are basically a terrible bunch of people. There are some good people in it, but for the most part, it shows an era that's bygone. An era that's sadly in the past, but unfortunately still has a lot of repercussions for today. They use this framing method pretty well in that we see these 60-ish things happening, like racism, like casual racism and casual sexism happening, but it's also acts as a mirror for today's society in a way, where we get to see, we're still seeing this kind of thing happening even today. Mad Men, despite being a period show, is still very relevant in today's world. It stars Jon Hamm as Don Draper, an advertising executive in New York City, who has a family and is basically the big ad guy that is able to come up with all this great creative ad work. But he's actually not a great person in real life. He's not a good guy. He has a lot of flaws. For instance, he cheats on his wife so casually and so nonchalantly and lies to his kids, and he drinks and smokes. And spoiler alert, he's not actually even Don Draper. His real name is Dick Whitman, and he was originally in, I believe, the Korean War, where his commanding officer, Don Draper, ended up dying. So he basically switched identities with them to get out of the war faster. And he's been living with this lie ever since. His whole identity is crafted and a persona, and it's not truly him. It's almost sociopathic in a way that he just creates this identity of Don Draper to get away from his family life as Dick Whitman, because his family life is really messed up. He comes from a broken home. Basically, his mother was a prostitute. She died in childbirth, and his father begrudgingly took him in, and it's just crazy stuff. And then he was raised by his stepmother who hated him, and he didn't live a great life, and it almost, in a way, lends to why he is the way he is later on in life. How he is, sure, on the surface, he's a good father, but his actions are not something to look up to. And the show really paints him as not a great person. But much like AMC's other show, Breaking Bad, it revels in the fact that its main character is this anti-hero or even villain at times. And it uses this interesting structure to make for some compelling storytelling. We see Don get away with a lot of things, and it's really disheartening to see, because he doesn't treat people really with respect. He doesn't treat his wife with respect, for sure, and his kids, he constantly pulls the wool in front of their eyes. So he's not a great guy, and the great thing about it is Jon Hamm does this really amazing performance where, even though he's doing these horrible things and is this horrible person, he comes off as still likable because it's Jon Hamm. You can't dislike him. He's got such a charismatic presence. He's so handsome. Like, you can't fight that. It's tough to see him as a terrible person, but he manages to really pay off the times where Don's really lecherous or really just cruel and mean, and he really makes it terrifying. There's one scene in particular that I'm not going to go into spoilers with it, but it has to do with him and his daughter, and it's a really tense and terrifying scene because you don't know what's going to happen because of the way that they're playing the characters. And the cast is basically chock full of amazing, amazing actors. You have Elizabeth Moss as Peggy Olson. Elizabeth Moss, of course, having just won Best Actress at the Emmys for her role in The Handmaid's Tale. And she's Peggy Olson, who starts off as this sheepish, shy secretary, but becomes this strong, self-assured person towards the end of the series. And it's awesome to see her transformation and how she learns to work within this world that is basically set up for her to fail. It's a world that's set up by white men for white men, and women or people of a different race or color cannot succeed in this world. But she manages to pull the strings and work the system in a way that she eventually gets into a pretty good place for herself. And the same can be said of Joan Holloway, or Joan Harris, played by Christina Hendricks. And she's a person that starts off the series. She's been working within this system for so long that she's gotten used to it, and she's trying to help Peggy work within the system as well. But she manages to become so much more than what she starts out as, just the head secretary that everybody looks to. She starts in somewhat of a position of power, but manages to really climb the ladder and really be a great character. And she's just, her presence on the screen is just amazing. Christina Hendricks does an amazing job pulling you in and make you say, like, Joan is such an awesome, awesome character. I want to say more, but I don't want to spoil anything because her character progression is just amazing, and she's one of the better characters on the show. Along with, in my opinion, I love Roger Sterling. He is one of the worst human beings on the face of the earth, but the way that he's played is just so much fun to watch. It's amazing seeing John Slattery make this character who does all of the wrong things and represents the old guard. He makes him so likable. Like, Roger does some really just terribly racist things and does some really sexist things, and John Slattery brings out the humanity in this character, but still makes you not like what the character's actions are, because, of course, there are terrible things to do to a human being. There's terrible ways to treat a human being. All these characters on the show are really well done, and even the background characters, the tertiary characters, like, for instance, Harry Crane, gets a big storyline where you could see their character progression from the beginning of the series to the end of the series. And I think that's the most recognizable in Pete Campbell, played by Vincent Kartheiser. Pete Campbell is probably one of my favorite television characters of all time because he is such a sad sack and such a whiny person who never gets what he wants, and he's like a child. He's an impetuous child. His mannerisms and how he reacts to everything are just hilarious. Like, he's like, "Hell's bells, Trudy." Or the show really enjoys making fun of Pete Campbell, and it's a lot of fun to watch. Vincent Kartheiser makes the character just lecherous and creepy, and there's some of the things that Pete Campbell does that are, nobody on the show comes out unscathed in the terms of being innocent and nice. There's a lot of people on this show that are terrible people, and it's a show about terrible people, but the actors give them some likability that when they do these terrible things, you don't hate them for it. You feel like they can be redeemed. You feel like they can learn, that they could change their ways, and you're hoping for it. You're hoping that Don stops cheating on his wife. You're hoping that Pete Campbell stops being such a whiny sad sack. You hope that Roger Sterling stops being so racist. You want these characters to become better, and you're invested in seeing them become better people. And I think that's a really good draw to the series, because honestly, you could have a show where everybody's a terrible person and you just hate the characters, but you end up liking these characters despite their flaws, and they're very big flaws. They're huge flaws. That makes them so real, because you think, oh, well, that reminds me of one of my old friends that used to be like that, stuff like that. And you're like, okay, I see this in my time. I'm not just seeing this in the 60s. I'm seeing this today, and that's not good. These are things that are happening that we need to change. And Mad Men allows us to almost put up a mirror to our society through the lens of the 60s show. And it gives us some things that we need to work on. It shows us some different topics that are still relevant and still sadly prevalent in today's society, and we need to change. And I think the show really does a good job of that. It makes it so that the audience is like, okay, I see what was bad in the 60s is still kind of bad today, and it's still really affecting us, and we need to put a stop to that. We need to see how we can change that, because obviously it's an outdated form of whatever, because these characters are doing it in the 60s, and they don't even know what a copying machine is. They make fun of a machine that magically copies a paper in the first episode, and that's the first, groaner moment in terms of, we're in the 60s, but besides that, the show does a really good job of drawing you into that atmosphere of the 60s in both a good way with the set design and the costumes and just the characters' mannerisms, but also in a bad way with all of the inherent racism and sexism within the workplace. But sadly, it's something that's still going on, and the show really does a good job of putting that to light, bringing that to light. And unfortunately, the creator of the show, Matthew Weiner, was recently accused of sexual harassment in the workplace, and it's honestly really sad to see that, because this is a show that seems to be aware of these issues happening and wants to change it, and yet the creator seems to, it's almost a do as I say, not as I do type of deal, and it's not a very good thing. But I thought that I really couldn't continue this episode without mentioning that, because it is a little weird that's the case. It's sad that Hollywood still is like that, but Mad Men is still a good show despite all of the flaws of its creator. So that's going to be it for this week's episode of On Screen. If you have any future topics for any episodes, I would love to hear them. I would love to cover anything that you would like me to cover. And as always, until next time, take care.